Good evening. The biggest oil rig in the world, the rig called Ocean Ranger, is lying at the bottom of the sea.
The ocean can be an unforgiving place. It's vast, powerful, and unpredictable. And yet, humans have found ways to survive and work in some of the harshest conditions on Earth. One of those ways is through massive offshore oil rigs, floating cities in the middle of nowhere, designed to drill deep beneath the ocean floor. These structures are built to withstand some of the worst weather imaginable, but sometimes even the best designs can fail. And when they do, the consequences are catastrophic. The Ocean Ranger was one of the largest semi-submersible oil rigs in the world. At the time it was built, it was considered an engineering marvel. The rig was 396 feet long, 362 feet wide, and stood at a towering 337 feet, about as tall as a 30-story building. But unlike a skyscraper, a significant portion of the Ocean Ranger sat beneath the waterline, floating on two massive pontoons. These pontoons, which extended 80 feet below the ocean's surface, contained ballast tanks. By filling or emptying these tanks with seawater, the rig could adjust its buoyancy and stability in the roughest seas. Owned by an American company called Ocean Drilling and Exploration Company, ODECO, the Ocean Ranger was chartered to Mobil Oil Canada to drill in the Hibernia oil field. It operated on the Grand Banks, a section of the North Atlantic located east of St. John's, Newfoundland. The region was known for its oil and gas reserves, but it was also infamous for brutal winter storms. The North Atlantic was no stranger to hurricane-force winds, massive waves, and ice-cold temperatures. Despite this, the Ocean Ranger had been through storms before, and its crew had faith that it could handle anything nature threw at it. February 14th, 1982. On the morning of February 14th, weather reports warned of a powerful winter storm heading toward the Grand Banks. The storm was connected to a massive Atlantic cyclone, and it was shaping up to be one of the worst in recent memory. The crew of the Ocean Ranger, all 84 of them, began storm preparations. Standard procedure required them to secure loose equipment, check that all doors and portholes were sealed, and ensure that the rig's ballast system was working properly. The ballast control system was especially important. It kept the rig balanced by managing the amount of seawater inside its tanks. Despite the storm warning, drilling operations continued. The Ocean Ranger had weathered many storms before, and the industry standard was to avoid shutting down operations unless absolutely necessary. This was a high-stakes business, and delays meant money lost. The crew felt confident that the rig would hold up. By the evening, the storm had fully arrived. Winds howled at over 100 knots, and waves soared up to 110 feet high. The Ocean Ranger, designed to handle extreme conditions, was being pushed to its limits. Other nearby oil rigs, such as the Sedco 706, were also struggling against the storm, with one rig losing a lifeboat to the monstrous waves. Then, just past midnight, disaster struck. A massive rogue wave, larger than anything seen before, slammed into the Ocean Ranger. It hit so hard that it shattered a porthole window in the ballast control room, located just 25 feet above the waterline. Seawater immediately began pouring into the room, flooding the electronic systems that controlled the ballast tanks. This was catastrophic, the fatal chain reaction. With the ballast control room flooded, the system began malfunctioning, opening and closing valves on its own. The crew lost control of the rig's balance. Instead of staying level, the Ocean Ranger began to tilt forward. As it dipped lower into the waves, more seawater rushed in, making the situation even worse. At first, the crew tried to manually override the system, but there was one major problem. They didn't have the proper training to do so. There wasn't even a manual on board that explained how to regain control if the automatic system failed. To make matters worse, the rig's ballast pumps were located in the stern, the opposite end of the rig. As the bow continued to sink, the stern lifted higher out of the water, making it nearly impossible for the pumps to push water back out. The Ocean Ranger was in a death spiral, and the crew knew it. At 12:52 a.m., The Ocean Ranger sent out a mayday call. The support vessel Seaforth Highlander was ordered to assist, while the Canadian Coast Guard and mobile oil-operated helicopters were put on standby.
The helicopters were sent from armed forces bases around the East Coast and were later joined by fixed-wing aircraft.
We saw a few bodies, and we continued our search. A couple of life rafts were overturned, and as the search went on, myself and the other helicopter, we came across various mounds of debris.
Hospitals in St. John's prepared for incoming survivors, but the storm made any kind of rescue mission nearly impossible. Winds, waves, and blinding snow severely limited visibility. The crew, now in full panic mode, attempted to abandon the rig, but that was easier said than done. The Ocean Ranger's lifeboats used a gravity drop system, which required the rig to be relatively level to launch properly, but with the rig severely tilting, launching lifeboats became almost impossible. One lifeboat managed to get into the water, but as it approached the Seaforth Highlander, it was smashed against the rescue vessel by the waves and collapsed. Survivors floated in the freezing water, their bodies tossed around by the raging sea. Rescuers tried everything to pull them out, but hypothermia set in within minutes. One man, seen wearing a bright orange survival suit, was hooked by a grappling line, but just as rescuers tried to pull him in, he slipped below the waves and vanished.
You tried to make a rescue. You tried to pick up one of the bodies. What happened?
It wasn't a rescue. The first body we came upon, we tried to lower a SAR-tech down to see if he can see if there's any life, and we put him in the water, but the waves are about 40, 50 feet, and he was close enough to ascertain that there was no life. The fellow was dead, and he was fully dressed in his immersion suit and had a life vest on, and we attempted to recover, but it was too dangerous for our SAR-tech, so we brought him back in.
At 3:13 a.m., the Ocean Ranger capsized and sank beneath the waves. The rescue effort turned into a recovery mission. Despite the massive search effort, all 84 crew members perished.
Good evening. The biggest oil rig in the world, the rig called Ocean Ranger, is lying at the bottom of the sea. It collapsed and sank off the coast of Newfoundland in a fierce Atlantic gale. Missing and presumed drowned are 84 people, the Ranger's entire crew.
Only 22 bodies were ever recovered. Their personal belongings washed up on Newfoundland's shores in the days that followed. The wreck of the Ocean Ranger was found in about 100 feet of water. Since this was considered a hazard to marine traffic, authorities decided to refloat the rig and sink it in deeper water. However, during the salvage operation, 2 divers were killed when trapped gases ignited, causing an explosion.
Since it went down last year with a loss of 84 lives, the Ocean Ranger oil rig has been a hazard to shipping. So the authorities are trying to move it. But the deaths of 2 divers yesterday tragically underlines the dangers involved.
The divers left St. John's last week on this barge to refloat the Ocean Ranger and then sink it further out to sea in deeper water. Right now, the Ocean Ranger is a navigational hazard, sitting upside down in 90 meters of water with its derrick broken off. The top of it is just 30 meters from the surface of the water, a potential danger for large ships. The divers' first assignment was to penetrate the rig's pontoons, to get inside so they could empty tanks of fuel. To get to those fuel tanks, the divers were to use a large cutting torch to get through the pontoon's inch-thick steel shell.
Obviously, 2 men have died, so it's proven to be a hazardous operation.
Another diver was crushed by falling debris a week later. This brought the total death toll to 87. The Ocean Ranger disaster was one of the worst offshore oil rig accidents in history. Investigations revealed that the crew wasn't properly trained, the ballast system lacked proper manual overrides, and there weren't enough safety procedures in place for extreme emergencies. As a result, regulations in the offshore drilling industry were tightened worldwide. Lifeboat launching systems were improved, training was made mandatory, and rig designs were upgraded to prevent similar disasters in the future. But for the 84 men aboard the Ocean Ranger, it was too late. They had put their faith in the rig, believing it was unsinkable. But in the end, the ocean proved them wrong.